Hello, and welcome back to Beyond the Transaction, Skies is the Limit, where we take a deep dive into the colorful world of marketing, branding, and customer experiences. This podcast series delves into transcending mere commercial exchanges and uncovering the stories of individuals who are shaping the way we experience beauty and functionality. I'm your host, Katie Baldwin, and today we're journeying into the realm of creativity where the extraordinary becomes the norm. And who better to guide us through this venture than the exceptional Adam Bryce? Adam, a maestro in the global creative scene, wears many hats. Creative director of art department, the powerhouse behind Island magazine, and the visionary of new ventures. From Parisian days as a design assistant at Chanel to capturing moments for Levi's, Nike, and Vogue, we're delving into his take on the current market right here in New Zealand. It's a raw, real discussion into the pulse of our creative landscape and business opportunities. Our aim is to make Beyond the Transaction not just another podcast, but rather create a capsule of creative minds and business entrepreneurs operating in New Zealand today. It's about seeing the stories behind the businesses, understanding the depth beyond a mere transaction, and Adam, with his seasoned perspective, embodies this ethos. We're not just beyond transactions, we're beyond limits. Let's step into the extraordinary world of Adam Bryce. Welcome, Adam. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Katie. It's nice to be here.
I think the natural progression is hearing about your backstory. I've read heaps about you, Adam, and your journey is as fascinating as it is diverse. In your own words, how do you usually introduce yourself?
I've learned a lot about that over the last couple of years with regard to my own feelings about it. I, for a long time, as you said, wore a lot of hats, and it made me quite self-conscious because I grew up in an era where you study something and you go on to do that job and you work your way up and you become successful, hopefully, and you just build a life like that. And but for me, I never really knew what that was that I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to be involved, and there were certain things that I was particularly passionate about, which made me want to be involved more and hopefully or potentially made me good at them. But it at the same time made me very self-conscious as to the fact that perhaps I wasn't the real deal in any of them. But I think it was only and not to go down a particularly dark path, but I don't see it that way. The passing of my good friend Virgil Abloh and the acknowledgement in his passing of all the different things that he did, and that actually made him who he was. And it wasn't a case of he was somewhat good at something, somewhat good at something else. He was, that was his identity. It was that he was interested in lots of different things, took it upon himself to take chances and do things. And I think that Virgil and I had, known each other for a long time, since we were, I think, 20. And, so 20 years before he passed, and we'd been very similar throughout that in terms of our interests and where they lay across lots of different subcultures, across lots of different creative mediums. So to answer your question, I tend to, it depends on the circumstances, I'll be honest.
Yeah, definitely.
Like if I'm having to get if I'm having to pass through customs.
What do you fill out in that little square box?
I pretty much say something different depending on the country I'm going into. I do.
Official businessman.
Yeah. I do, because I know there's certain things that I've learned aren't the best thing to say in certain places. It depends on the circumstances. Generally, I just say I'm a creative director or I'm a consultant. But I'm not, whilst I think a lot of people do, and when I get to know people, I'm very chatty, but I'm generally quite shy with people I don't know. So I'm not I try to, with someone I'm just meeting or someone, I try to say something that won't start a conversation. Because I think I've had experience in the past where I've said things that definitely started conversation. But yeah, generally I say creative director or consultant.
How do you acknowledge your backstory? I think it's important to give it a voice.
Yeah, we were just talking about this before, I think, off air. And I think for me, when I was younger, or up until recently, I think it was always been really confident in my ability to do my job, whatever that job is, whatever day it is. That part's never really been a problem for me. But I've always been quite a self-conscious person. So for a long time, not that I was ever particularly loud about it, but it was kind of important for me that people knew some of the things I had done to validate myself. I know that what I do today will speak for itself and it doesn't need the validation of what I've done in the past. I'm a massive believer in working hard, and, those who know me know that I don't stop working. My life and my work are very much one thing. For me, I acknowledge those things every day because I use the experiences to constantly help me in my work today.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, have you always been that way, or do you think it exponentially grew as you had those tougher jobs in the beginning of your career?
No, I think I think if you spoke to teachers at school, they would disagree with me, but that was mainly due to, I blame them personally.
You're listening today.
I blame them for their lack of interest in content. I've always had a really obsessive personality. So I think once I decide I'm going to do something, I will go like hammer and tong to do it no matter what. I won't stop. And that often does mean that that involves, working 3 days straight and no sleep and all those kind of crazy things that I tend to do. And but also sometimes, a lot of the time, I just don't even see it as work. So I don't really sometimes go, oh, I'm working too hard. It takes other people to acknowledge that of me, because for me, I'm generally enjoying myself. Yeah. So it's not really that much of a problem. I mean, I was really fortunate enough to have assisted some really high profile people when I was younger. I think when I left New Zealand, I had one level of what I thought was hard work. And I kind of acknowledged quite early on that I was more driven than a lot of the people around me, and willing to work harder, and willing to sacrifice things for that. But I think when I got to London initially, I found that there were other people like that. And whether that was people who I was competing for jobs for or people who I was assisting when I was young. Yeah, it was both. It was good because it made me feel a little bit more like I wasn't crazy. But then it also kind of, really, luckily for me, I was driven enough to sort of drive through it. It didn't put me off, but it definitely had elements of me being like, oh shit, this isn't going to be as easy as I thought it was, because there's other people who know as much as me or know more or work harder than me, and I'm going to have to, it's not just going to happen. Yeah.
So I didn't know you were close friends with Virgil.
Yeah, we actually, this shows my age, but we met on AOL.
Yeah. AIM?
Yeah, AIM. And maybe, I'd say like 2002, 2003.
Yeah.
We would have both been, he was studying architecture at the time.
I didn't know you could meet people.
Well, I think like it was more like,
buddy list.
I think someone introduced me to him during, like, via a forum, actually.
Yeah, right.
Which is even weirder. Because, I mean, actually at the time, I'll be honest, now the idea of a forum seems like a very strange thing. But at the time, it was just community.
It was the early internet.
Right? Like, that's just where people who were interested in certain things hung out, So I got introduced to someone here, but then I think how I guess I put it is that we had our first like chat outside of a forum on AOL, AIM, right. And then we would have sort of group chats with other people who, Justin Saunders who has the brand Jound now, and Chuck Anderson, who was a great designer at the time, still is. I'm sure. Sorry, Chuck. And other people like that. So we would just have we'd have this forum life, but then we'd also have Virgil and I would have chats very regularly, and then we'd obviously when I moved to America later on, we got closer, and he was often traveling, and we were working in the same circles, and And we actually, I think I put this on Instagram recently, but the last chat we had before he passed was that we were going to make a book about the internet together, which I'm almost more not that I wasn't into it then. It's made me think maybe it's worth doing.
It's time.
Yeah, it's worth doing. Maybe. Yeah. Even now, like you and I talking about AIM and MSN Messenger and those kind of things, like, and forums, like there's a strange subculture of the internet that, it's quite interesting.
That's thriving and living.
Yeah.
But you only know if you're amongst it.
Yeah. Like
you can go day to day, no problem.
Yeah, and I think back now, like being a part of that internet, that early internet thing, the amount of people I met through that who are today, very high profile people and we all met, and I'm lucky to know them, I guess, and they're friends of mine and we work together or whatever the case may be. But to think back and how weird, like, I don't know, like from the out, I've seen normal at the time, but from the outside to think that that's how you met on a forum talking about Japanese streetwear, like that's kind of weird. Like,
You touched on it, I guess, more for the listeners who aren't as familiar with your background.
Yeah.
You started an assistant.
Yeah, I started assisting stylists. And at that point, that's definitely what I wanted to do, be a stylist. And but I don't even know if I knew what that really entailed at the time. I just liked the idea of, being a part of the process of creating imagery or creating magazines or creating content, whatever that content may be at the time. And then start from there, I was lucky enough to have met people who helped get other jobs and bits and pieces. And I was also very quiet, which I'm sure lots of people will be surprised now. But at the time I was very quiet. And so I think that a lot of them really liked me around because I would just get on with things. I would do whatever they wanted me to do. I never questioned anything. I really, especially coming from New Zealand, for me, I was just like dumbfounded that I was even able to assist these people,
in the same room.
Yeah, like being able to make, like, I think there were others around who, they say, grab me a coffee and they'd get a little bit miffed, but I would just be stoked I could make them a coffee, So I think
2 creams, 1 sugar.
Yeah, I'll just do whatever you want.
Black.
So I'll milk the cow, whatever. So they, so I think they really liked me having me around because I just wasn't I just got things done, and was quiet and didn't bother them. And then they would, so when they would get jobs, they would. They would get me on those big jobs and I'd gradually meet people. Once you find your place or where you kind of belong in that industry, like it's really small and you can very quickly meet everyone you need to know. And I think I discovered really early on that just by being nice or just by being yourself, you were probably going to get work.
Yeah.
Just by working hard and not being a dick, pretty much.
And then did you transition to photography at what point?
I actually transitioned really late. Had an agency here that we did really well and it was amazing. And it got a little bit complicated where the agency was doing really well, but a big fashion company here wanted me to come and work as creative director of that company. I didn't really want to leave my agency, but they were really keen for me to come on board. So I kept saying no. They kept coming back. It kept continuing until they were eventually willing to kind of do some sort of, I could do both, basically, was their agreement. I'd only really just moved back. At the time, I didn't really like a lot of the photography I was seeing locally. And I met a lot of photographers. We would have photographers come to my office and pitch to me constantly. And I just couldn't see the relevance in their work and for what we were trying to achieve at this brand, which was we were trying to make big change and try and become globally relevant. So I really struggled with what was being offered on the table locally. So we started shooting and creating all the campaigns for that brand internationally or here, but by bringing international teams over.
Right.
The reason I left that brand was on my own accord, and I left because of my frustrations with the board and understanding of culture. I remember hearing someone say to me that they had heard I was fired because I used all the budget too quickly, which ironically is not what happened, but I had used all the budget. So I was like, that could have happened, but it didn't. But anyway, that's my long version of how I became a photographer, but it was because I had used all the budget at this brand. And then we had this really big shoot in New York, which we did a big campaign with Petra Collins at the time, who amazing artist, photographer, kind of muse, I guess. We shot this campaign. It was amazing. Really, really stoked. Super amped to have got Petra at the time. She just started doing stuff for Gucci as well. For me, it was definitely one of the biggest things I think a New Zealand brand had done. I think even now probably still would be, and in fashion. And we shot in New York, and then that evening I thought, I don't know, I was kind of amped on it. We had a few preview shots from that had been sent through to me by Petra, because she had taken self-portraits, and I sent them through to the CEO and the chairman, and I received a very strange phone call of someone just absolutely losing their mind at what I had done, and that it was a disaster, and that I had to basically fix it, but I only had 2 days before we flew back, and the campaign had about a week before I had to go live. So, kind of long story short, it was I think that was a Saturday night so it was like maybe 9-10 o'clock on Saturday night, and I rang the stylist, who was Zara Merkin, who's a New Zealand stylist, but based in New York and still is based in New York. I rang Zara and said, we have this problem. Not really even sure how to deal with it at the moment. We'll have to deal with the Petra part of it later, because I don't have time right now, but can you come and shoot with me tomorrow, and we've got to shoot it again. She was like, who's shooting it? And I said, well, we don't have any money left, so I don't really know. And she was like, okay. And I was like, who can we get? And we were kind of brainstorming, and we were like, no one's going to do it for free for this brand. Like, it's a big brand, no one's going to do that. So I just went, I'll figure it out. And she was like, yeah, cool. And then literally we had to it's like still by this time, it's like 11 o'clock at night in New York, Saturday night. We're calling like all the model friends we knew, like begging them to come and shoot with us tomorrow. They're all like in the clubs, like answering their phone, going like, where are you? And we're like, no, I need to talk to you. And they're like, well, come down, man, come down. And I'm like, no, I don't understand. You need to go home because you've got to shoot tomorrow. Yeah. And they're like, what? And I'm like, also, by the way, you're kind of doing it for free. And they were like,
put that drink down.
Yeah, I was like, please put the drink down and please get a cab home. But anyway, yeah, so I still hadn't figured out a photographer situation. So I just, it's really stupid now in hindsight. And I just went, how hard can it be?
Yeah.
And I went, so we were meeting at like 9, I think, in the morning to go to Coney Island, this model and me and Zara. And I shot the campaign and flew back, and they looked quite good. And I was like, that was quite fun. And then a couple of magazines in Australia had seen those photos, and they contacted our like marketing team and said, oh, who took the photos? We really liked them. And they were like, oh, it was Adam. And they were like, oh, can we get his details? And they gave him my details, and they contacted me and said, would you want to shoot editorial? And I was like, yeah, cool. And then Georgia Alice had just started her first brand at the time, and she had seen the photos and got in touch and was like, would you shoot my first campaign? And I was like, yeah, cool. So I left, and soon afterwards left my agency as well. You know what? I've done a lot. I'm just going to take some photos for a while, and that's kind of how that started. It didn't take long. Like very quickly, I just started getting a lot of work. And then it kind of built to a point where all of a sudden I was like almost like shooting in Australia all week.
That's interesting, because part of your story, you started off with voicing that you were frustrated from the beginning with the photographers and the option. That's why you had to go overseas.
Yeah.
So that was your first flag right there. Like, oh, maybe I should have just picked up the camera at that point.
I should have done it earlier on and saved the money.
Yeah, no, but it's all part
and
of
it was
thing.
ironic that like it didn't take long before I had, like, as a photographer, I had to start going overseas. So when I started Index and Island magazines and art paper, so when we started publishing, I was really conscious I really was kind of burnt out and didn't really enjoy it anymore. And I was kind of despondent. So I kind of put my head down, wanted to build art department, build the magazines, and just focus on that for a while. But then I think in the last, I would say even the last couple of months, become kind of more open to it again.
Right.
I'm not really even sure why. I think when sometimes you just need a break.
Going through these different phases or different lives that you've said, how do you see each project contributing to your creative evolution? Now, I will preface that with the word that I had a problem with internally was evolution. I don't know if it's essentially like caveman walking, sort of evolution, or if it's more of a compound dynamic.
Yeah, creativity is really interesting even the word creativity I find really interesting because I don't sometimes I feel like I don't really know what it means. I think that through that evolution or through this career, and now where I'm in a position where I do have particularly different hats on all the time, real creativity is just problem solving with an eye, if you know what I mean. Yeah. It's just problem solving with taste. It's there was this great Tom Sachs. He had this great line, and I can't remember if it was like a ad campaign he'd done with someone or something anyway. But it was basically that. I can't remember the wording exactly now, but it was something like creativity is our worst enemy. And I have over time learnt to believe that to some extent. I think it's very easy to be, for me anyway, it's very easy to be creative with no agenda. What's more difficult and more challenging is to put creativity into commercial ventures and use creativity as a source to solve problems. Yeah. I can't remember what the question was.
It was, how do you see each project contributing to your creative evolution?
Yeah, well, I think they all help you learn. You learn something every day, and you learn something in your in the projects you work on there, and it all culminates in an extended massive knowledge and skill sets that you can take into the next. And obviously, the more you do, the older you get, the more you've done, the better that playbook is. I always think that, and the reason why I've always been so heavy on research and understanding and knowledge, subcultures and the like, is that, to be a good creative director or whatever it is I do, we don't even know what that is, is really a case of being able to make the right decision and fairly quickly. And the way I look at it is that the more relative knowledge you have, whether it be right or wrong, enables you to pull those decisions from more educated places. So I guess, every project and every different hat that I've worn has helped me make better decisions over time. So, now if I'm the creative director on a project, but I'm not the photographer, I know exactly what the photographer's going through. So I'm able to work with that photographer in a more constructive way.
Yeah. So essentially what I'm distilling is that the more experience, the more knowledge you gain.
Yeah. If you're to kind of quantify creativity, very dependent on knowledge. Yeah. The more knowledge you're able to pull upon, the more creative you're able to be. As I said before, I think for me, it's about helping achieve goals for whoever that is or whatever that is. So the more knowledge, the better decision making you have.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Curious to know if there is a pivotal moment or turning point that sticks out.
I think the biggest, if it's a skill, the biggest skill I have is my openness to listening and learning. So I think that those pivotal moments come about for me more often than they possibly do for others. I feel as though, in all honesty, I have maybe fairly pivotal moments almost once a month. Right. So it's difficult for me to say. I mean, there are things that seem obvious, but then in hindsight, they didn't feel particularly monumental at the time. They felt just like that was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But there's certainly been things. I think for me, it's always about the people I think that I've met and the and relationships that I have with those people. You know, this moment that, you know, someone who I used to assist when I was really young then came to me and asked me to consult on his business. And that, real like turning point for my understanding of where I was.
Right.
And my confidence and my realization of where I'd got to. And also that what I was actually really good at for a long time, especially, you know, at that stage, especially. So when I was about 30, I'd done really big things, but in my head, I was still just trying to climb.
Yeah.
Like I didn't really have like a rooftop. Every big thing I did I thought it was just another step towards the next big thing. So whenever I achieved something, I would never celebrate that, and it would never come back on me as like a level of like building my self-esteem. It would almost have the opposite effect, where it just meant, okay, all you've done, like in the third person, like all you've done, Adam, is taken the next step. So you better get to the next one. You better get to the next one. It was difficult. Like I was just very, very hard on myself.
Well, I think a lot of people can relate to that, because it sounds like you grew so rapidly, or even if it took years and years, it does take that outside coming feedback back to you.
Yeah, you need something, whatever it is. Sometimes it's a weird thing, like you're someone who you assisted coming back to ask you to work, or sometimes it's like an award, or I don't know, whatever it is, that different people, different things, and but you do need some sort of validation. Creativity is a really internal thing, right? And so you really mess with your own mind a lot of the time, and you somehow, somewhere need some validation. And it's, if you're like me, we're kind of like just so driven that nothing's ever good enough, then, you know, it's not going to come from you. It's definitely not going to come from within. Yeah. But I think I told you the story once before, but I remember in another pivotal moment for me. Well, it's not even a pivotal moment, but something I remember, which I think validates what I was just saying then. And, you know, I was working with a large sportswear company, and I was the creative director of this project. And again, you know, I was at a point where I had done a lot of things, and I was the creative director on this really big project at this really big brand. And I hosted a meeting with VPs, like big people, all sorts of people in there, and left the meeting and actually got a bit of a bollocking because I was too like humble in the meeting, and told that I really needed to start being louder and more arrogant. I mean, I do always remember the word arrogant, because I questioned whether that was the correct word at the time.
Negative connotation.
I was like, I'm not sure if you thought that through. But yeah, I always remember that too, because I do remember that being like a bit of a acknowledgement to me that, oh, okay, I think if you're at this level, then maybe there's ways that people perceive you're supposed to act. And maybe I wasn't believing in myself enough to act the way that I should have been acting. And I still think that person, if you're listening, arrogant wasn't the right word, but
remove that from your...
yeah. But you know, I get where you're coming from. Yeah.
I want to jump into your most recent project, New Projects, Everyday Foundations. What sparked this?
You know, as someone who works for a lot of other people, I find it very easy to come up with names and brand expressions and things like that for other people.
It almost seems obvious. It's like, I can take all this information and distill it out.
Yeah. But then when it's yourself, I was like, oh, I don't know what to do here. It's something that I wanted to do for a long time. And it really comes from my kind of early obsession, where, you know, coming from that like streetwear fashion world really early on, you know, we would sit on these forums for hours debating with people all over the world as to how a t-shirt should be cut. This project really, it just comes from that, you know, intense fascination with that, and wanting to create something that's exactly how I feel it should be. And then also this commercial element of acknowledgement that there's this gap in the market, and that I just couldn't find any undies. Yeah. I mean, I've been ordering underwear from Japan for about almost 20 years now, and it's getting, that was getting a bit tiresome, having to get, you know, that's quite an extreme way to get your underwear. Yeah. Having to send some guy you've never really met to Uniqlo to buy you underwear every couple of months is for 20 years is kind of a weird relationship. But yeah, I just felt as though there was more people I spoke to, guys in particular, but women as well. And there was just a need for something in that space. And it was something that I felt I could do really well because of my sort of obsession with, how these things should be done.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so far so good. I mean, it's very soft launch and, I just essentially haven't really done much yet, just kind of emailed friends and sort of said, here it is. And lucky to have a lot of support of people who ordered quite a lot actually so far, which was amazing. Also slightly unexpected, which caused me some logistical issues. I wasn't quite prepared for that, but I do thank you all. Yeah. But yeah, so next stage now is to figure out some of those logistics and prepare for, as I said earlier, like I don't really do things by half, so prepare for the growth of that.
Yeah. I mean, it all sounds like great problems to have.
Oh, absolutely.
I would say this is a creative business.
Yeah, and I think that to what I was saying before and to what, the kind of whole premise to this series of podcasts is that for me, creativity with commercial success is really where creativity is valuable.
How would you define the label creative business?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, it's something I'm really, really interested in because I think, you could look at it like agencies, use their creativity to make money. Then brands that are creative themselves can be considered creative businesses. And then there's also brands that work or create products that are considered more creative. So fashion, lifestyle, homewares, music, those kind of things as well. So I think creative business can take fold in numerous different ways. The most interesting part for me at the moment is working with brands that are trying to become successful in whichever way and trying to help them become successful in whichever way they need to do. That's for me the most interesting part of my job and the thing I'm most interested in right now is probably, ironically, it's probably the thing that most creatives are least interested in. It's certainly something that I was very much less interested in when I was younger. But now I think the challenge of understanding you can use creativity to help a business and that business's livelihood and its staff's livelihood and its business success. Phrases like return on investment and stuff used to, just grate me. But now I'm kind of into it. I'm into the challenge of it. Like I kind of like figuring out a way that you can use it to better or save or whatever the company is a bit more meaningful to me right now.
So changing gears just a little bit, Kiwi businesses and people too often grapple with this balancing of global trends and also maintaining that local authenticity. From your perspective and all your global experience, what is that balance or how does it shape up?
I think that's really, hugely important question for every brand in New Zealand, Aotearoa, to figure out for themselves. I would say the majority of businesses, brands potentially have gone on about their day and gone on about a business and have developed more intricate strategies without having even figured that part out yet. And for me, that part is probably the first thing you want to figure out is who you are and who are you for, which obviously sounds really simplistic, but when you do what I do and you go into businesses, you'd be surprised that's not really always the case. I mean, even with new projects every day, found out I've got to shorten it. Now I'm already rethinking the brand.
NPE.
Yeah, maybe we're just going to initially NPE. Yeah. Anyway, that probably stands for something really bad. So I think I'll get cancelled. But yeah, I think that even in the week that brand exists in the world, I've already decided to redo the packaging, which is quite a costly mistake to have made. Well, it's not a mistake. Costly decision.
Yeah.
Because I felt as though the packaging took it down a particular place, which wasn't actually really where the growth and what the potential of the brand was. But yeah, to answer your question, I think figuring that out, where you sit, how you operate, how you look at global trends versus local trends, how you create brand identity that resonates with a local market and an international market, or one or the other. Massive challenges for brands, more and more so today, because we should be very aware of where we are and where we come from. I think in all honesty, I think you have to really sit down at the beginning, or even if you look at the beginning as today as like a reset for your brand. I think that you really have to think about what are you trying to achieve. Because I think if you're trying to be a global brand from New Zealand, that's one thing. If you're trying to be a successful New Zealand brand in New Zealand, that's another thing. If you're trying to be just for an overseas market, but you happen to be here, then that's another thing again. So I think you really have to look at like who it is you're trying to reach and what your overall goal is. I think it's very difficult, in all honesty, because of the cultural differences and nuances and where we sit globally, physically and culturally, and very difficult, I think, to take something with, a really strong New Zealand identity to the world. I think that whilst that sounds good on paper, and there have obviously been examples of where that has worked, I think it's not as easy. You hear about the success stories because they are outstanding,
right?
Not because they're the norm. So I think if your goal is to create a brand and take it global, then I think you really need to consider what that means from day one, because those markets are vastly different.
And I would even say to that, though, I think there's still space in the balance of, even if you are a Kiwi business operating just only to this market, there's still value in looking outside.
Oh, yeah. I think it comes back to what I was saying before. Like, the more you have to have more knowledge. You need to know everything about every brand that could possibly touch your brand in any way to make the right decision. So, let's say Duck Island, like, you make ice cream, and I mean, you can't ignore Ben & Jerry's just because it's American. Like, physically, it is actually down the road in this scenario, so it's probably not the best example, but, because it literally is your competitor. But, I don't think you can go, well, just ignore it. I think you can definitely, in that particular case, they're very different things and they can live in different worlds, but there's always going to be crossover. So you can't ignore what's going on. I think you need to be aware of what's going on globally, even if you're local, to help you make the correct local decision. For a lot of people, you also have to take into account like your personal reasons for why you started that brand and what it means to you. And a lot of these things can become psychological more than they become, business decisions.
Reality.
Yeah, reality. Like if for you, your brand looking like it's global helps you psychologically move forward, then that could be exactly what you need to do. The balance, as you say, is whether that's going to be successful in the marketplace.
In previous episodes, we've distilled topics down to beauty and function, whether it's a duality or a complementing relationship. And as it's so closely related to creative industries and businesses, I'm curious to hear if you have any input on this.
Yes. I mean, it is literally what I think about every day, more than anything else, probably. And it is hugely important to what I do and all my roles. Whatever I do, that seems to end up being the main cause of friction, even whether that be internally for me or between myself and a client. Essentially you need both, right? And essentially if something is really good, you can do both.
Yeah.
You shouldn't really have to sacrifice one for the other, because design is very much problem solving, more so than almost any other part of creativity is problem solving to create function. That's graphic design, fashion design, like set design. They all have to come from function initially, and when you look at most iconic elements of design over the past however many years, all the really iconic things they were created because of function. There are certain brands that have become successful purely off the ability to do both.
Yeah,
and those are the brands that often the ones that are in our day-to-day life more than anything else. And whether it be Apple, I think within fashion, I think of Acne, I think of Nike. I think about it a lot with charities or not-for-profits. There was very much this movement of, I would say like this sort of like tree-hugging, Birkenstock-wearing type, where charities just had this sort of look about them. And then And then in the more recent times, it became more obvious to them that if they came across more slick, professional, relevant, they would be more successful. And I think that's been proven within those worlds time and time again. I've certainly worked on projects like that where they've been incredibly successful because of how they look. And I've seen ones that, I see day to day, I see, great causes that are probably underfunded, don't do that well because they're still in a tree hugging phase. And by tree hugging phase, I mean aesthetically. Aesthetically, yeah. I think that, whereas you look at something like Breast Cancer Research Trust and the level of professionalism and aesthetic and brings about credibility, which brings about,
well, the ROI.
Yeah. The ROI on that is pretty good.
Pay for itself.
It'll pay for itself. I think, proportionally, especially something government funded. The design element. Yeah, I've kind of contradicted myself a few times there because, I think essentially you have to start with function, but there's just no reason not to make it look good.
Maybe not the balance is the right word, but the sweet spot.
Yeah, the sweet spot. I think that's important.
We will wrap it up. Thank you so much, Adam, again, for sharing your experiences and the conversation. Tell the listeners what you're up to, where they can find you.
Please buy Island Magazine if you haven't already. For us, it's like we're trying to create something really important in the media landscape here and make something really relevant to New Zealanders. The New Projects Everyday Foundations. For me, I'm really passionate about it at the moment, and we all need undies and T-shirts and socks. But they're all those things that you always need, and that's all online at newprojects.global.
Awesome. And to our listeners, if you're still listening, thank you. We want to make content that's helpful to you, so please find Skyzer anywhere on the World Wide Web and tell us your thoughts. If you're enjoying it, follow, like, bookmark, alert, ding the bell, whatever tickles your fancy. We will be back to discuss more about the creative people and businesses shaping Aotearoa. But until then, I am still Katie Baldwin, and this was an episode of Beyond the Transaction. See you later. Choo. Is that true?
It's good to get that.
Shit, I know. As soon as I started, I was like, oh shit, I forgot to pick that.
Nikes. Just Nikes.